in the silent, endless embrace of the night, when shadows dance and every whisper echoes with unease, stories are born, stories that should never be told alone, tales that stretch beyond the boundaries of reality and step into a world you can never escape. This is where fear is not just a feeling, but a living, breathing entity, lurking in the dark corners of your mind, refusing to let you go. Are you ready? Before you lie, 20 chilling tales, stories that will steal your breath and haunt your dreams. So keep the lights on and promise yourself you won't be alone, or maybe, just maybe you will. Story number 1. This terrifying Iranian story took place in one of the towns in the western part of the country, around the year 1931. In a village, there was a woman named Mahbubeh, who is no longer alive today. After her husband passed away, she chose not to remarry and raised all 4 of her children on her own. Mahbubeh's routine involved leaving her house early in the morning at 5 a.m. to work with several other women. However, one day, her workplace changed, and her colleagues made a plan to meet her the next morning at 5 a.m. to take her to the new location. The next day, exactly at 5 a.m., despite heavy snowfall, someone knocked on her door. Mahbubeh went to the door to head to work. When she reached the door and saw her colleague, she closed the door and began following her colleague's footsteps in the snow. Since the snow was deep, she carefully placed her feet in the footprints left by her colleague, who was walking ahead. As they moved further away from the house, Mahbubeh noticed something strange. The footprints of her colleague were gradually growing larger. She was shocked but didn't say anything or show any reaction. She continued walking until the footprints became so large that she realized something was terribly wrong. Terrified, she stopped in her tracks and hurried back home. When she returned, she was stunned to see her colleague standing at the door, waiting for her. Mahbubeh asked her what had happened, and her colleague replied, "You did well to come back. That wasn't a person, it was a jinn, a supernatural creature trying to take you away." This story is a classic example of the eerie and supernatural tales deeply rooted in Iranian folklore, often reflecting the fears and beliefs of the people, especially in rural areas. It highlights the importance of intuition and caution in the face of the unknown. Story number 2. This real horror story, which has inspired a terrifying escape room experience similar to the longest horror escape room, is narrated by someone who used to live in Kashan. On weekends, he would go to the public bathhouse. Since most people had the same weekend routine, the bathhouse would get very crowded. This man tried to go early and return before it got too busy. The rest of the story is told in his own words. "That day, like other days, I went to the bathhouse so early that the bathhouse attendant was still asleep, and all the lights were off. He had warned me not to wake him up when I arrived, so I quietly went about my business. This time, I noticed a man washing himself in the bathhouse. Since I had never seen anyone else there at that hour, I greeted him, and we started talking. I asked him to scrub my back, and since he was short, I had to sit on a bench so he could reach me. He also had a fairly long beard. I sat on the bench in the bathhouse, and he began scrubbing my back while we continued talking. We were deeply engrossed in conversation when I bent my head to make it easier for him to scrub my back. Suddenly, I saw something that everyone had talked about, but I had never witnessed with my own eyes. Instead of feet, this man had hooves. A cold sweat broke out on my body, and I started trembling. He asked me, "Why are you shaking?" I replied, "It's really cold." It was as if he didn't realize that I had just discovered I had been talking to a jinn, a supernatural creature, all this time, and I wondered why I hadn't noticed his feet earlier. Without showing my fear, I rinsed myself, said goodbye to him, and left the bathhouse. As usual, I left the money on the bathhouse table and walked out. I talked to people I trusted about what happened, and they all said, "It's true you saw him, but don't worry too much about it." However, I never saw that man again. I even asked the bathhouse attendant, who said he had never seen such a person. Now that I'm 80 years old, I think to myself, how brave I was to keep going to the bathhouse alone after that incident. Story number 3. Helium balloon. A horror story about a helium balloon. This story is from about a year ago and is one of the newest horror stories shared by Enigma's followers. It is completely real and was recounted by a credible individual. A family living in Tehran's Sharqi Danish experienced strange events that began when the personal belongings of their daughter, who had recently gotten engaged, started disappearing. From her earrings, which would reappear in the same spot 2 months later, to other personal items, everything seemed to vanish mysteriously. Whenever she told her family about it, they wouldn't believe her and would say, "You must have put it somewhere and forgotten where." The story takes a chilling turn when the family goes on a trip to the north of Iran. After a birthday party thrown by the daughter's fiancé, all the guests leave, and the daughter goes to her room to sleep. While lying in bed and talking to her fiancé on the phone, she notices something terrifying. A helium balloon from her mother's room has somehow made its way into her room. To get to her room, the balloon would have had to descend 3 times, passing through the living room and other spaces, before reaching her bedroom. When she sees this, she is struck speechless. She barely makes it through the night, and after her parents return, she tells them what happened. But who would believe such a story? However, we are certain that this story is true. This eerie tale highlights how ordinary objects, like a helium balloon, can become sources of terror when placed in inexplicable situations. It also reflects the frustration of not being believed when experiencing something truly unsettling. Stories like these remind us that sometimes the most mundane things can carry the most chilling mysteries. Story number 4. Helium balloon. A horror story about a helium balloon. This story is from about a year ago and is one of the newest horror stories shared by Enigma's followers. It is completely real and was recounted by a credible individual. A family living in Tehran's Sharqi Danish experienced strange events that began when the personal belongings of their daughter, who had recently gotten engaged, started disappearing. From her earrings, which would reappear in the same spot 2 months later, to other personal items, everything seemed to vanish mysteriously. Whenever she told her family about it, they wouldn't believe her and would say, "You must have put it somewhere and forgotten where." The story takes a chilling turn when the family goes on a trip to the north of Iran. After a birthday party thrown by the daughter's fiancé, all the guests leave, and the daughter goes to her room to sleep. While lying in bed and talking to her fiancé on the phone, she notices something terrifying. A helium balloon from her mother's room has somehow made its way into her room. To get to her room, the balloon would have had to descend 3 times, passing through the living room and other spaces, before reaching her bedroom. When she sees this, she is struck speechless. She barely makes it through the night, and after her parents return, she tells them what happened. But who would believe such a story? However, we are certain that this story is true. This eerie tale highlights how ordinary objects, like a helium balloon, can become sources of terror when placed in inexplicable situations. It also reflects the frustration of not being believed when experiencing something truly unsettling. Stories like these remind us that sometimes the most mundane things can carry the most chilling mysteries. Story number 5. The Shadow. A horror story about a shadow on the wall. This scary story I want to share with you dates back to my teenage years. My father was in the military and we lived in military housing. The house was about 120 square meters and had a hallway leading from the entrance to the storage room. Next to the storage room were 2 bedrooms. One night, when I couldn't sleep and was staring at the ceiling, I noticed a shadow of a person falling on the ceiling. The hallway light was always on, so we could easily go to the bathroom and come back. At first, it didn't seem strange to me because I thought it was my father or mother coming back from the bathroom, but suddenly things got weirder. As the person reached the front of the storage room, their shadow fell on the curtain of my room, and I saw a short person with severely bow legs walk into the storage room. I was so shocked that I went to the other bedroom and saw that everyone was asleep. Terrified, I went back to my bed, pulled the covers over my head, and tried to sleep. The next day, no matter how much I told my family about what I had seen, they kept saying, "You must have been dreaming," or "It was just your imagination," and so on. But I am certain it wasn't a dream. It was all very real. This story has stayed with me ever since, and I still can't explain what I saw that night. It's one of those eerie experiences that makes you question what's real and what's not, especially when no one believes you. The shadow on the wall remains a haunting memory from my teenage years. Story number 6. The Uninvited Guests. Walking in the Rain. This story took place in one of the villages near Qom and dates back to an evening when heavy rain was pouring down, and the sky was gradually darkening. One of the villagers, who narrates this terrifying story herself, says, "My husband hadn't returned home yet, and the rain was really heavy. I was busy with my chores inside the house when I heard a knock on the door. I was sure it was my husband, so I went to open the door, but instead, I saw a young man and woman standing there, completely drenched. They told me, "We are strangers, and if you would be kind enough, we'd like to stay in your house until the rain stops." I knew my husband would be upset if he found out I hadn't let them in, so I warmly welcomed them and insisted they come inside. When they entered, they didn't take off their shoes, which was strange, but I didn't say anything. What I saw with my own eyes next is something I wouldn't have believed if someone else had told me. Despite the muddy village and the dirty yard due to the rain, the house remained completely clean. This made me suspicious, so I told them, "Please sit, I'll be right back," and I went to my neighbor's house. As soon as she opened the door, I rushed in and told her the story. She put on her chatter and said, "Let's go, don't be afraid." When we came out of her house, we saw 2 sheep walking away from her house. My neighbor said, "Who would let their sheep out in this rain?" I told her, "Forget about the sheep. Let's go inside before they suspect anything." We went back into my house and searched everywhere, but there was no trace of the young man and woman. I was speechless and barely managed to tell my neighbor, "I swear to God they were here." She interrupted me and said, "You're right, and I should have realized that those 2 sheep were them, leaving your house." When my husband came home, I told him the story, and he said, "Thank God nothing happened to you." This eerie encounter remains one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. It's a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary situations can take a terrifying turn, and not everything is as it seems. Story number 7. The Evil Doppelganger. A horror story about a bad doppelganger. Hello, my name is Muhammad, and I've been married for 2 years now. The scary story I'm about to tell you happened about 10 to 11 years ago. My father was in the military and we lived in military housing at the time. Everything started when I bought a box from Cashin. This box had a latch, and when you opened it, a witch figurine inside would start laughing, and its eyes would light up. One night, while I was asleep, I heard the sound of the witch laughing. When I woke up, the laughter stopped, but the witch's eyes were still glowing. I got up and closed the box. I wanted to go to the bathroom. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway, on the right, and I had to pass the kitchen to get there. As I walked past the kitchen, I saw something standing there, a tall figure with long black hair and hooves for feet. I was so terrified that I backed away, unable to scream, and returned to my bed. The next day, I told my family about it, and they placed a Quran above my head for protection. Nothing else happened until about 4 years ago. I was riding my motorcycle. I didn't have a helmet, when suddenly someone made a loud noise right next to my ear. It was so close and clear that I almost lost control of the motorcycle. I looked around, but saw nothing, even though I knew it was him again. I continued on my way. A few weeks later, I was sleeping at home when the bedroom door opened. I sat up on the bed and was about to close the door when something hit my chest twice. It was so real that I instinctively tried to push it away, and I felt it. Then, I heard the same noise right next to my ear. I thought I was hallucinating and got up to leave the room, but it hit my chest twice again and made the same noise near my ear. I had no idea what to do. A few days after this incident, I was sleeping when something hit my face. I woke up and saw that my face was bleeding. I called my mom and turned on the light, only to find that the fluorescent light had come loose and was tilted. The wall decorations were askew, and a picture of me had fallen and hit my face. I left the house and went to my friend's place. They lived in the same building, and told him the story. He said, "Let me make some tea to calm you down." As soon as he turned on the gas stove, the gas hose exploded into powder. We ran out in fear. After this, I went to see someone I was referred to, and they told me, "Your doppelganger is tormenting you, and it's not a good one. Try not to be afraid of it, and it won't bother you." Then, one day, I was smoking a cigarette downstairs when I saw someone tapping on my cigarette to shake off the ash. They did this 2 or 3 times. I knew it was him. I said everything that came to my mind, challenging him to show himself, but nothing happened. Until recently, while we were sleeping, my wife heard the same terrifying, old noises coming from my side. I ignored it and went back to sleep. Thankfully, nothing has happened since then, and I'm grateful to God. This story is a chilling reminder of how unexplained and supernatural events can disrupt our lives, and how confronting our fears can sometimes be the only way to find peace. Story number 8. The Untimely Knock. a horror story about knocking on the door. Hello again, my name is Muhammad, and I'm the same person who promised to share my story if that evil doppelganger came back to haunt me. This incident happened just 2 days ago, on March 10th, 2024. I came home from work earlier than usual and decided to rest until my wife arrived. I lay down on the bed, and just as I was about to turn over, I heard a knock on the door. I was surprised because my wife has a key, and if she could open the building door, she could definitely open the apartment door. But then the knocking came again. I thought maybe she had forgotten her key, and suddenly I heard my wife's voice behind the door saying, "Oh, Muhammad, are you asleep? Muhammad, Muhammad." At that point, I was sure she must have forgotten her key, so I got up to open the door. But when I opened it, I froze. There was no one there. I immediately called my wife, thinking she might be playing a prank on me, but she said she was still at work and wouldn't be home for another hour. I don't know what this thing is or how far it plans to go to torment me, but I'm sharing this with you as I promised. These unexplained events keep happening, and I'm left wondering what's real and what's not. This story is a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary moments can take a terrifying turn, leaving us questioning our sanity and the world around us. Story number 9. The Horror of Loneliness. A horror story about being alone. Hello, I've been living alone for about 4 years now, and I'm a woman. Over these 4 years, I've experienced some strange and unsettling problems. I keep sensing weird smells around me, like cigarette smoke, perfume, or cologne. The strange thing is, no matter where I go, these smells follow me. To those who might say, "Maybe you're wearing perfume," I don't use any perfumes or colognes because I have severe allergies. Every night, the fluorescent light in my house turns on and off by itself, even though I burn a spand, wild rue, every evening at sunset, recite the 4 Qols, and play the Quran out loud. None of this seems to help. It's almost as if whatever is here enjoys the sound of the Quran. I feel like it's a jinn, a supernatural being, and I'm convinced it really is. Some people tell me to sell the house, but I don't think that would make a difference. I spent a month at my sister's house in another city, and the smell followed me there too. So, to those who suggest selling the house, I want to say, if you're dealing with something like this, don't bother uprooting yourself and moving somewhere else. These entities are everywhere. The only solution if you're single and living alone is to get married or bring a friend or tenant into your home. They seem to target lonely people, trying to mess with their minds. However, Muslim jinns, if they are Muslim, usually don't bother you unless you harm them. In my case, they haven't caused any physical harm, but they have a lot of power to manipulate things. The bottom line is, they're everywhere, not just in one house. If you're alone, try to keep yourself busy, whether it's watching movies, playing games, or doing something to keep your mind occupied, so you don't dwell on their presence. This story is a reminder of how loneliness can sometimes open the door to unexplained and unsettling experiences. It's important to stay strong and find ways to protect your mental peace, even when faced with the unknown. Story number 10. The Old House. A horror story about a haunted old house. This real horror story I'm about to tell you happened 8 years ago when my father decided to rent a house in the upper part of Ashrafai Isfahani Street in Isfahan. All the houses on that street were newly built except for the one we rented. It still had its old structure and a traditional courtyard, which is what won over my parents. The strange part of the story began when the real estate agent on the street mentioned, "We've tried to rebuild this house several times, but it never worked out." Why? That was the question. To cut to the chase, we moved in and everything seemed fine at first. I went to work, my sister went to school, and we were enjoying our time there, until one night at 3 a.m. I got up to use the bathroom and saw my mother preparing a tray of tea in the living room. I asked her, "Mom, what's this for?" Her answer left me stunned. She said, "Can't you see? There are people sitting all around and we have guests. Don't interrupt the gathering like this." I could see the anxiety in her eyes. I tried to convince her that there was no one there and that we should go back to bed, but she was terrified and insisted, "Just go to sleep." My father was away on a work trip, so I waited for him to return and told him everything. At first, he thought maybe my mother had been sleepwalking or hallucinating, but I insisted. He went around and asked the neighbors about the house. We found out that everyone who had lived in that house either went crazy or fled from it, even though the neighbors never noticed anything unusual. When we confronted the real estate agent, after much denial, he finally admitted, "Honestly, I've heard the stories too, but I thought they were just superstitions." My mother's behavior in that house became increasingly strange, and she became more aggressive. Eventually, my father canceled the lease. When we told the landlord about breaking the contract, we advised him to either demolish the house or not rent it out to anyone. He replied, "Every time I tried to rebuild it, something terrible would happen to me, my family, or the construction workers." You won't believe it, but after we moved out, peace returned to our lives and my mother's behavior. To this day, my mother still talks about that house with fear and tears in her eyes. And even after 8 years, that old house remains empty. This story is a chilling reminder of how some places carry a dark energy that can't be explained. It's a tale of how the past can haunt the present, and how some mysteries are better left untouched. Story number 11. The Towel and the Bathroom. A horror story about the veiled woman and the bathroom. Before I tell you this scary story, I need to explain that we lived in an old 2-story house, and I absolutely hate the cold, so in winter, no windows in our house were ever opened. My story begins like this. One day, when my mother and I were home alone, I told her I was going to take a shower. As usual, on a cold winter day, nothing feels better than a hot shower. When I finished showering and turned off the water, I heard a knock on the door. I opened the door and saw my towel lying there. I picked it up and was about to step out when I noticed a woman in the room above the stairs. The bathroom was lower than the room and had stairs leading up. She was the same height and build as my mother, wearing a white chador, and she walked toward the window. A sharp, eerie feeling came over me. I shouted, "Mom, what are you doing?" But then I noticed the window was open, and my mother was nowhere to be seen. I screamed, "Mom, Mom," until my mother came up from the lower floor and asked, "What's wrong?" I was at the neighbors downstairs for about 15 minutes. "I left the towel for you," I said. "You knocked on the bathroom door 2 minutes ago, and the towel was there." She replied, "No, I left the towel and went to the neighbors without knocking." I was frozen in fear. I kept insisting, "You knocked," but my mother swore she hadn't. Then I asked, "So you didn't open the window?" My mother said, "Are you crazy? We never open the windows because of you." I remember my blood pressure dropped and I told her the whole story, terrified. I hope something like this never happens again. This story is a chilling reminder of how ordinary moments can turn into terrifying experiences, leaving us questioning what's real and what's not. It's a tale of how the supernatural can intrude into our lives, even in the most familiar places. Story number 12. The Grandfather. A horror story about someone who looked like my grandfather. I live in my grandparents' house. One day, after a tiring day at work, I headed home to get ready for a party at my aunt's house. My grandfather was waiting for me so we could go together. When I got home, I saw my grandfather and told him, "I'm covered in car oil. Let me take a shower, and then we'll go." I went to the bathroom, and it took me about 30 to 40 minutes to wash off the oil and get clean. When I came out of the bathroom, I saw my grandfather still sitting there, not ready yet. I said, "I'll get dressed and dry my hair and then we'll go." I got dressed and came back, but my grandfather wasn't in the house anymore. I searched the entire house, calling out for him. I noticed his phone wasn't there either, so I thought maybe he got impatient and left on his own. I called him and asked, "Why didn't you wait for me? We were supposed to go together." What he said sent chills down my spine. He said, "After you went to the bathroom, I left for your aunt's house about 5 minutes later." Since my shower had taken a while and my grandfather had left shortly after I entered the bathroom, who was the person I saw sitting there waiting for me? A deep fear gripped me, but I tried to brush it off, blaming it on exhaustion and my imagination. I turned off all the lights in the house, leaving only the kitchen light on so it wouldn't be completely dark. I went to the front door, opened it, and as I was about to leave, I glanced inside the house. The kitchen is directly across from the entrance, and there I saw my grandfather, with wide, unnatural eyes and a strange, eerie smile, staring right at me. I don't even remember how I managed to lock the door and get out of the house. All I remember is running down the street in terror, too afraid to look back. This story is a chilling reminder of how the familiar can suddenly turn terrifying, leaving us questioning what's real and what's not. It's a tale of how the supernatural can invade our lives in the most unexpected ways, even in the safety of our own homes. Story number 13. The Dead Horses. A horror story about the ghostly mare. My great-grandfather used to tell this story about his own grandfather, who was the Khan lord of their town. Because of his position, almost half the town belonged to their family. My great-grandfather said they lived in a massive house, so big that each member of the Khan's family, his children and grandchildren, had their own separate homes within the courtyard. He said the courtyard was so large that it would become completely dark at night, and they had to wait until morning to go to the bathroom. The Khan, my great-great-grandfather, kept 120 horses in the stables. But they started noticing something horrifying. Every night, at least 10 horses would die, or the foals would be stillborn. One night, my great-great-grandfather, the Khan, his son, my great-grandfather's father, and my great-grandfather himself decided to keep watch to find out who or what was killing the horses. That night, they saw something unbelievable. One of the horses was running around the courtyard, without anyone riding it. The Khan, who was a very wise man, took a metal pin and approached the horse. He managed to stop it and pin the metal pin into the air. Suddenly, a woman with golden hair appeared, begging the Khan to let her go. In folklore, when a pin is used like this, it traps jinn or supernatural beings, making them prisoners of humans. The Khan, furious about the horses, refused to release her at first. The woman pleaded desperately, saying, "I have children who need me to nurse them. If you let me go, I promise that neither I nor any of the jinn around me will harm you or your family for 7 generations. Eventually, the Khan agreed to her plea and released her. From that day on, the mysterious deaths of the horses stopped, and the family lived in peace. This story is a fascinating blend of folklore and supernatural elements, showing how even the most powerful figures could be confronted with forces beyond their understanding. It also highlights the importance of wisdom, negotiation, and sometimes mercy, even in the face of fear and anger. Story number 14. The Strange Resemblance. A horror story about 2 identical men. This scary story I'm about to tell you comes from Mr. Abada. Due to his work conditions in a small town, he used to return home late at night. One evening, he was supposed to drop off his brother-in-law, Sultan, at his house after work. When Sultan arrived, they walked together toward his house, chatting along the way. When they reached Sultan's house, Sultan went inside, and Mr. Abada turned back to head to his own home. He hadn't walked far when he noticed someone leaning against the wall at the end of the alley. It was Sultan, smiling at him. Mr. Abada called out, "Sultan, Sultan," but it was as if Sultan couldn't hear him. Suddenly, he realized something was terribly wrong. The person he was seeing wasn't Sultan at all. Terrified, he quickly left the area and rushed back to his house. Mr. Abada later told the story to his son Kamars, who shared it with us. This eerie tale is a reminder of how the supernatural can blur the lines between reality and delusion, leaving us questioning what we see and who, or what, we're truly encountering. It's a chilling example of how the familiar can suddenly become unsettling. Story number 15. The White Horse's Mane. A horror story about the braided mane. This terrifying story comes from Mr. Amith, who heard it from his father. It's about a white horse they once had in Ardabil. He says, "We lived in the village of Naushar in Ardabil, and I worked in animal husbandry. Everything was fine until one day, while working, I noticed the mane of the white horse was braided. I thought maybe someone was playing a prank, or perhaps a girl had braided the horse's mane for fun. I waited until morning and went to tell the person in charge about it, but when I arrived, the horse's mane was completely smooth. I convinced myself I must have been mistaken and let it go. However, the next night, I saw the same horse's mane braided again. This time, I was sure I wasn't imagining it, so I decided to wait and see what would happen the following night. When night fell, I saw the white horse come out of the stable on its own and start trotting around. I was utterly shocked. Its mane was braided, and it kept trotting, stopping, and then starting again. When the horse got tired and started panting, it calmly went back into the stable to rest. I was speechless. The next day, I rushed to my boss and told him what had happened. He calmly said, "Sit down." He began to explain that the jinn, come every night, taking turns to ride the horse and braid its mane. He told me, "Just observe and don't interfere with these things." This story is a chilling reminder of how the supernatural can intertwine with the ordinary, leaving us in awe and fear of the unseen forces around us. It's a tale of how some mysteries are best left untouched, as they belong to a world beyond our understanding. Story number 16. The Embrace. A horror story about hugging a jinn in sleep. Ever since we moved into this house in Nassim Shar, strange noises and occurrences had started to make me a bit uneasy, though I'm not usually a fearful person. When I talked to my family about it, they said, "Yes, we've heard that this house is jinn. Just try not to do anything that might upset them if you hear or see something." From then on, I tried to act normally. But one day, I was home alone and decided to take a nap after finishing some freelance work I was doing at home. I lay down on my bed, on my side, with my back to the door. Suddenly, I felt as if someone had wrapped their arms around me and hugged me. But there were no arms around me. Remembering my family's advice, I stayed completely still and eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, my family had returned, and I told them what had happened. They were terrified and said, "You did the right thing by not reacting." After that, I saw a few other strange things, but none were as terrifying as that experience. This story is a reminder of how the supernatural can intrude into our lives in the most unexpected ways, and how sometimes the best response is to remain calm and avoid provoking the unknown. It's a chilling tale of how even the most ordinary moments can become haunting when the unseen world makes its presence known. Story number 17. The Old Basement. A horror story about the haunted basement. My grandmother's house had a basement, and she always claimed she could hear the sound of water and a baby crying coming from there. We would ask, "Why don't we hear it?" and she would get really upset about it. One day, I stayed over, and around 5 or 6 in the morning, I heard the sound of water and a baby crying coming from the basement. I thought to myself, so Grandma was telling the truth. I told my mother about it, and she and my father came over to open the basement door. What we saw was unbelievable. There was a basin full of water in the middle of the basement. My mother recited some prayers, emptied the water, and placed the basin in a corner. I told her, "I'll stay here tonight," and my grandmother was really happy to hear that. We thought everything was resolved, but at the same time the next morning, the sound of water and the baby crying returned. I was so terrified that I couldn't move. The same thing happened as the day before, and my parents came down again. How could this be? The basin was back in the middle of the basement, full of water. We emptied the water outside and threw the basin away to put my grandmother's mind at ease. The next morning, she called us at 5 a.m. and said, "I can hear the baby crying, but not the sound of water." This continued until we moved out of the house. The next owner rebuilt the place, and we never found out what happened to those sounds. This story is a chilling reminder of how some mysteries remain unsolved, and how the past can linger in the most unsettling ways. It's a tale of how the supernatural can invade our lives, leaving us with questions that may never be answered. Story number 18. The Mirror. A horror story about the mirror. Strange sounds had been coming from the house for a while, and I couldn't figure out what was causing all these weird occurrences. I used to think people who talked about supernatural things were superstitious, until that night when I saw the strangest thing in my life. That night, as I was about to go to sleep, I saw someone in the mirror. They came out of the hallway leading to our bedroom, moved quickly, and disappeared into the bathroom wall. When I turned my head, there was nothing there. It was as if nothing had happened. I immediately ran into the hallway, and the strange part is that my family was awake, but they didn't react at all. When I asked, "Didn't you see someone go into the bathroom wall?" they just laughed and said, "No." A few minutes later, we heard the sound of the bathroom faucet running. Everyone started blaming each other, saying, "Who forgot to turn off the faucet?" But I was the only one who had seen that strange scene. This story is a chilling reminder of how the supernatural can intrude into our lives in the most unexpected ways, leaving us questioning what's real and what's not. It's a tale of how even the most ordinary objects, like a mirror, can become gateways to the unexplained. Story number 19. The Dwarf Creatures. A horror story about the dwarf beings. The story I'm about to tell is about one of my friends in the 1980s. One day, my friend and his roommates, who had been playing with a Ouija board and tarot cards the night before, decided to go on a trip to Cashin to see the architecture of an old house they had heard about from a classmate. The owner of the house was an old woman. I'll tell the story from my friend's perspective. When we arrived at the gate of the old large house, The old woman looked at us and said, "You can explore everywhere except the basement." When we asked why, she repeated firmly, "I'm telling you again, do not go into the basement." But curiosity got the better of us. After looking around the house, we decided to sneak into the basement. We went down the stairs. There were no lights in the basement, and it was pitch black. Excited, we entered the basement, and a few of my friends jokingly shouted, "Hey, hey, where are you? Come and eat us," and laughed. A few moments later, we heard strange whispering in an unfamiliar language. Suddenly, we saw small, dwarf-like creatures with furry faces, resembling old men, attacking us. They started punching and kicking us. No matter how much we screamed, the old woman couldn't hear us. I was so scared that I covered my head with my hands while the creatures kicked my arms and sides. After 2 or 3 minutes, we realized they had disappeared into the darkness. We ran up the basement stairs, bruised and battered, and left the house without saying goodbye to the old woman. My friends and I were so shocked by what happened that we didn't speak to each other for a long time. This story is a chilling reminder of how curiosity can lead us into terrifying situations, and how some places hold secrets that are better left unexplored. It's a tale of how the unknown can lurk in the darkest corners, waiting to be discovered, or to strike. Story number 20. ##### Mary Stanfield. **** The Haunted Mannequin Diary ***** June 1st, 1922 ****. Today, my mother bought me a mannequin to display my products in the shop window. The mannequin is unusually heavy, but after all, it's just a mannequin. I'm grateful to my mother because I believe it will attract more women to my clothing store. June 5th, 1922 ****. Today, while working in the shop, a concerned customer told me the mannequin was staring at her. This was strange, because the mannequin has no eyes, just an empty face. I went to inspect it and also felt it staring intensely at me. Weird. June 6th, 1922 ****. Today, the owner of the shop next door went missing. It's sad, we were good friends. Also, it seems my mannequin has disappeared too. I won't forgive whoever stole it. June 7th, 1922 ****. I found the mannequin. It seems some rude person dressed it in the clothes of the poor old man from the neighborhood who recently died and put it back in the window. Because of this, I'm now a suspect in the old man's murder. A murder suspect. This is barbaric. I can't wait for the real culprit to be found. June 15th, 1922 ****. Today, I'm seriously the main suspect in the old man's murder. I'm so scared. Why does the police think it's me? July 3rd, 1922 ****. Someone tore out an entire page of my diary. To replace it, I'll summarize the end of the month. I was acquitted in the old man's case due to insufficient evidence, but now my sister has gone missing, and someone has dressed the mannequin in her clothes. That person is a psychopath. My customers keep telling me stories about the mannequin moving in the window, even though no one was in the shop to move it. I plan to take the mannequin down and sell it. It's scaring the customers. July 5th, 1922 ****. Something is happening. I hear people knocking on my door at night. My window is cracked, and I still haven't found a buyer for the mannequin. I posted an ad to sell it, but not a single person has called. July 10th, 1922 ****. My mother. She's gone missing. July 17th, 1922 ****. Her clothes. My mother's clothes are on the mannequin. I can't believe it took me a whole week to fully realize and accept this. I might be going insane, but I think the mannequin is behind all of this. This diary was found on July 18th, 1922, after Mary Stanfield disappeared from her home. Her clothes were seen on the mannequin in her shop. The mannequin was sold to a dealer in New York. This eerie and mysterious story recounts the tragic fate of Mary Stanfield and her strange mannequin. The diary entries reveal how an apparently harmless object can become a source of terror and destruction, leading to the unraveling of a person's life. And now, as the final words of these tales fade into the darkness, a heavy silence settles around you. But are you truly alone? Or is something waiting in the shadows, breathing softly, listening to your every move? 20 terrifying stories have come to an end, but the fears they've awakened may never leave you. Don't turn off the lights, and don't look behind you. Something might be there that shouldn't be. Good night, if you can sleep.